Get started. Welcome to the last session of the first day of TechEd. I do a lot of these things. I speak at a lot of conferences, and whenever I go to conferences, it's like going to those restaurants where you come in and they give you these 50-page menu, and you're like, everything looks so good, but what am I going to choose, right? So I thought about that problem, and I think I came up with a solution. So I said, why don't we do a taster menu? Right, like a little, you come in, you get little nibbles of everything, so you can choose what you want to do later. Proposed this to Microsoft, they thought it was a great idea, and here we are. So this session talks about .NET 4 and what it can do for you, or 16 great reasons to adopt and leverage .NET 4. A little bit about myself. Who is this guy talking to you here? My name is Shai Cohen. I used to work at Microsoft for quite a long time. 5 of those years I spent on WCF. So I shipped in .NET 3, .NET 3.5. Also worked on a bunch of other products. Today I'm an independent consultant. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I do special ninja projects, and I have all sorts of businesses that I'm trying to create. But enough about me. Let's talk about me and Microsoft. So I left Microsoft, but I stayed pretty close, both physically and technologically. I'm on a lot of Microsoft advisory boards. I do a lot of design reviews with Microsoft. I speak. This is my third TechEd in 6 months. And I do a lot of projects with Microsoft as well. So I'm pretty involved in everything that's going on in there. This session is going to focus on .NET 4. And to understand where we are, let's talk about how we got to .NET 4. So in 2002, Microsoft shipped CLR 1 with .NET 1. 2003, a year later, 1.1 came out. Then in 2005, a CLR 2 came along, and with it, .NET 2. And afterwards, it was kind of like a layer cake, where they kept adding features on top of CLR 2. So we had .NET Framework 3, 3.5, and 3.5 SP1. About a year ago, Microsoft shipped CLR 4 with .NET 4, and that's where we are today. Now, looking at the release cadence, every 2 to 3 years, release a version, you can take a guess at when the next version is going to come out. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we can plan for that as we go through the talk. So we're going to have a 3-course taster meal. We're going to talk about how .NET 4 enhances your current investment, how it gives you new tools, the new tools that you can get with .NET 4, and, as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about the future, how it prepares you for that future that is coming, I guess, fairly soon. Developers, 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 developers. I guess I do a really bad Steve Ballmer impersonation, but developers are really important. Microsoft realizes that developers are really important. And so the developer tool for Microsoft is obviously Visual Studio. And with .NET 4, we had Visual Studio 2010. I'm not going to have a lot of time to talk about Visual Studio. Some of the things I will touch Visual Studio, but I really don't have a lot of time to get into that. There's a great talk on Wednesday, but Dustin and Kate, they're going to do like a tips and tricks session, going to talk about the idea and all the cool stuff that you can get in there. Kind of a little taster thing, right? There's all the new stuff that you can get with that, the new IDE that is based on WPF, support for productivity things like multi-monitor, better navigation. It's highly customizable with plugins that third parties can provide, but also things that you can do with things like the start page. The place where it's relevant to .NET 4 is in multi-targeting. So it used to be that every version of Visual Studio was working against the version of the .NET framework that it shipped with. Well, Visual Studio 2010 supports multi-targeting. So the fact that you are embracing Visual Studio 2010 doesn't mean that you can't code against the previous platforms. And that's really great in terms of adoption, in terms of, if you have any concerns, I'm going to move to that, then I'm going to have 2 things side by side installed like we used to have in the past, 2 IDEs. Well, not anymore. With one IDE, you can target multiple environments. You can write for Windows, and the web, and the phone, and the cloud, and SharePoint, and Office, all within the same IDE. Ready for your first course? current investments. One really important thing when you adopt a new framework is that what you already have, your existing stuff, just keeps working. If it stops working, that's a no-show. .NET Framework always had side-by-side support. We can have multiple versions of the .NET Framework installed on the same machine, and the application would run against the version of the .NET Framework that they were compiled against. Well, in .NET 4, you can load and start multiple versions of .NET within the same process. Okay, so not different processes, each one targeting its own .NET Framework, but you can actually have multiple versions of the .NET Framework running within the same process. And it offers really fine control over which version of .NET Framework you're going to be using. In those cases, we have a mixed version case where you have a lot of versions of .NET running inside of the same app. You're going to see those little things pop up during my talk. Okay? There's a lot of details, and those things are links to where you can get that extra content. So just keep looking for these. As you download the deck afterwards, you could just go, get to the thing that you wanted to learn more about, click the link, a wealth of information right there. So there are several benefits to this new side-by-side model. For end users and administrators, when they install a new version, this new version of the framework, 4.0, I should say, then they can be sure that existing apps will keep running like they did before. For developers, side-by-side doesn't have that big of an effect on them because by default, as I said, applications run on against the .NET framework that they were compiled with. But you can override that and tell an app to run under a new version of .NET, one that it was not compiled against. So if you have a 3.0 app, you can tell it, oh, you know what, run on 4.0. For library developers and consumers, well, the story there is it's not really solvable because libraries continue to use the runtime of the app domain that they were loaded into. But if something was built against an earlier runtime, and so you have an app that was built against, say, 3.0, and now you built a new library written with 4, well, you can tell that app, you know what, run under 4 so that my library can work. And if you're writing managed COM components, in the past, those components had to run against the latest version of the .NET framework that you had installed on the machine. Well, now you can tell them to run against the .NET version that they were compiled with. Okay? So that's side by side. Now, as we look at your current investment, the first thing we're going to talk about is the base class library, or the BCL. In the base class library, if you're using .NET, you're using BCL. Okay? Other things you may or may not be using, BCL, everybody uses. Microsoft had made a lot of improvements in the BCL itself, with things like garbage collection that can create more responsive apps, with things like networking improvements that allow you to traverse NATs using IPv6, enhancements to the file system APIs that allow you to access large directories or large files, inclusion of memory map files so that you can edit those huge files that cannot fit in memory, or you can create shared memory for inter-process communication. All these investments show to me that Microsoft is dedicated to the platform. Right? Microsoft could be investing in the base stuff, not just in shiny new things. A lot of times you'll see companies saying, okay, well, we built that. Let's just build new things to put on top of that. No, they go and they retrofitted the base class library so that your base is the foundation is more solid. Client profile. How many people here use the client profile? How many people here know about the client profile? Okay, that's great, because I'm going to tell you all about the client profile. So the client profile is a minified version of .NET. Right? It's about, the download is about 15% smaller, and so we get slightly faster deployment experience. But the important thing about it is that it only has the pieces that client applications care about, and none of that server stuff that you won't need on a client operating system. So if we want to look at it visually, here's the full .NET framework, all of the assets that it has, all of the libraries. In the client framework, ASP.NET and WCF the server components of WCF are not relevant, and so they're gone. With Windows Workflow Foundation, called WF, you'll hear me say that, Windows Workflow Foundation ships with both 4 and 3.5. We're going to talk about why that is, but 4 is not included in the client framework. 3.5 is for backward compatibility reasons. Also, in terms of the processors that it targets, IA64 is a server architecture. And so the client doesn't target that, doesn't exist there. Okay? All right, 50% smaller. Big deal, right? 15%, really? We've got fast networks. Why should you care? Well, the reason is that because that's what your users most likely have on their machine. If people are using Windows 7, for example, .NET 3.5 SP1, and the charts talk about the size in megabytes of the framework, okay? So 3.5 SP1 shipped with Windows 7, and then the client profile was pushed as a recommended update via Windows Update to people. And so most people actually have that installed on their machine. And here's the link to the KB article talking about that particular recommended update. So one benefit that you get from that is that you get a smaller installer for your app. You don't have to take .NET Framework 4 with you so that as a pre-requirement to your app being installed and running properly on the machine. It's already there. But there are a lot more benefits to the client profile. The first one is that it's safer for client machines. Not having ASP.NET reduces the attack surface of the machine. Right? You don't have all these places where bad guys can come in and attack the client machine. And that's really important. And the other thing is that all those servicing events, the Windows updates, they don't have to apply to the client machine, all the ones that pertain to all those pieces that are missing there, all the server components, right? They don't apply to the client machine, so the client gets fewer updates. The client profile in 4.0 is available everywhere .NET 4 can run. Okay? Everywhere .NET can run, I showed you this a little before, except for the IA64 architecture, which is supported by the full .NET 4 framework. Okay? In contrast, the 3.5 client profile was only supported on Windows XP machines with certain service packs that did not have .NET installed on them already. Okay? So 4 client profile is prolific. It's everywhere. Here's some more details about that. And the first reason of why you should adopt .NET 4 is because it's already everywhere. So we talked about the base class library, the client profile. Now we're going to talk about 2 types of applications. We're going to talk about web applications, and we're going to talk about client applications. If you had any concerns about adopting .NET 4 and ASP.NET 4 that comes with it because you already have existing investments in existing applications, have no fear. Okay? .NET 4 allows ASP.NET Web Forms and MVC2 or MVC3 to run side by side, even inside of the same application, which gives you a great migration path to MVC if you are on Web Forms and want to move forward. ASP.NET 4 includes a lot of improvements, and the first one we're going to talk about is application usability. jQuery. How many people here use jQuery today? Sweet. How many people here know what jQuery is? Okay, fantastic. For those who don't, jQuery is a JavaScript library that enables, well, at the foundation, at the basis, it was about traversing the DOM very easily. Okay, getting to elements in the HTML document object model in an efficient manner. But it evolved so much further than that, and all the libraries that come with it and accompany it and are sidekicks to it, right, allow you to do really brilliant things with web applications, like handling events, creating animations and pop-ups, and a whole universe of things that take HTML applications to the next level, makes them look like desktop applications. Microsoft fully embracing jQuery resulted in two things. The first one is that it is included by default whenever you create a new web application. I'm going to show you. The next thing, which is really cool, is the fact that you can get those, you can serve them, of course, if you have your app, you can serve them from your own server, but why would you want to do that? Right? Why do you want to waste your CPU, network, all those resources on libraries that are standard? Right? Everybody has them. So Microsoft is making them available through the Microsoft Content Distribution Network, the same high-efficiency network that is delivering Windows updates to all the millions and millions of users of Windows around the world. You can use that same network and pull those libraries from that network. Okay? And you can also get the Ajax libraries and other things. This thing doesn't only result in lower load on your own server, but also gives dramatic speed up for remote users. If you've got people accessing your application, your website from remote locations, they don't have to pull the data all the way from your server. They can just go to their local CDN and get it from there. And that's a huge improvement. Another thing with usability is that .NET 4 and ASP.NET 4 allows you to very intelligently target and create pages customized to different browsers and different devices. So it improved the device detection capabilities so you can know more about modern devices like the iPhone or Safari or Chrome, and then write your app to spit out HTML that is targeted for that device form factor or that specific browser capabilities. And by the way, this is extensible, so if new things come up or if you have your own or whatever the situation is, you can easily extend that. And the last thing that I want to talk about, there are many more, but the last thing I want to talk about right now is routing improvements. The routing improvements to ASP.NET allow you to create more memorable URLs. So for example, if you want to tell somebody to go and add a user to your local application, right? So you got a local web app and manage users or whatever, and the person has access rights, but he doesn't remember the URL, right? Well, right now it could be myapp/users/add. Right? And that thing will route them to the correct page where he can get that. And that doesn't only result in more memorable URLs and things that are just easier to understand and cope with for people, but also can improve or enhance the service engine optimization, SEO, so that your sites are going to be indexed better. And again, more details on that at this link. Charts. Charts are awesome. Everybody loves charts. Right? If you got a data-driven application, data-driven web UI, somebody sometime at some point will come to you and say, hey, can I have a chart for that? Microsoft picked up that glove and provided the ASP.NET chart control. It was an add-on to .NET Framework 3.5 SP1, and it comes built in .NET 4 with a lot of enhancements to what was available before. And that's great for people that want to do charts. While on topic of charts, .NET 4 also includes charting components that you can use for non-web apps like WinForms or WPF apps. So if you wanted charting, you got it. And here are the links where you can get more details on that. Performance. Everybody was worried about performance. How can we improve performance? How can the framework improve the performance of my app? .NET 4 includes support for session state compression. So if you're pushing session state to the client, when that could be compressed, so there's less traffic between your server and the client, back and forth, quicker apps, right? Permanent redirections. So previously, client would go to a website would say temporary redirect to there, that's where your content is. Right? Now you can do permanent redirection so that the clients won't have to go like that, they can directly go to the permanently redirected URL. ASP.NET has output caching that had been extended and expanded in .NET 4 and gives you really fine-grained control over caching on the server side of content. So you can cache whole pages, you can cache parts of pages, you can control a lot of ways in which those pages are cached and when should you refresh the cache and things of that nature. So you do less work on the server side and just hand out pre-made stuff that you already cached. And also, ASP.NET, the controls now emit cleaner HTML. It's just a lot nicer. It's a lot nicer, and it's also a lot smaller. And so smaller HTML results in quicker downloads. But it's also more nicely formatted and more regularly formatted so that whatever comes out is a lot more approachable for manipulation with things like jQuery. Right? The names of things that are generated and things of that nature you can predict what they would be. It's a lot more predictable. That's the word I was looking for. And finally, it has, if you're using Ajax, well, before you had to download the whole Ajax library, what if you just used part of that? Right? So it gives you final control over how you're going to download, which pieces, which components of the Ajax library you're going to download. So if you tell the Ajax framework manager, or the script manager, to work in explicit mode for the Ajax framework, then you can specify which pieces of the Ajax framework you want to download. Oh, and don't forget, you can get that from the CDN. Right? And so all these things result in really efficient and effective and highly performant web applications. Standards. Everybody loves standards in the web. And the reason why everybody loves standards is because you can write your app and you know that it's going to run very efficiently on multiple target platforms and target browsers. ASP.NET 4 enhances it has enhanced support for those web standards, and especially around accessibility. So if you're writing an application for the US government or want your application to be adopted by the US government, you got to be compliant with Section 508. That's the link if you don't know what that is. And ASP.NET now helps you create applications that are more Section 508 compliant. It also has enhanced support for CSS, so that most of the things, or more of the things that it emits, more of the controls that are being emitted out, are CSS enabled, which means that you can change the way that they look by applying CSS to them and create that specific look that you're looking for, that experience that you want to have in your website by using ASP.NET. Reason number 2 why you want to move to the .NET Framework 4 is because it makes your web apps shine brighter. Deployment. I love deployment. Deployment is one of the most forgotten, confusing, costly, and time-consuming aspects of building a web app. .NET 4 includes automation for many of the common deployment tasks, which both reduce the time that it takes the application to deploy, time that it takes you or whoever the system administrator to deploy an app, and reduce deployment errors because there's more explicit communication between the developer, whoever wrote the app, and whoever is deploying it. And at the same time, you need less communication. Now, I'm going to explain what that means. I just said 2 things that sounds contradictory. You'll see exactly what that means. So there are 4 aspects to that, but instead of talking about them, I want to show them to you. Visual Studio uses MS Deploy to create deployment packages for web applications. In this deployment package, you can specify which files you want to have, okay? And if you build a project that is an IIS web project, then you can also include the IIS settings that you want for your application. Then you can say, well, create me a zip file, create me this package as a zip file, and optionally, go ahead and deploy it to the server already. You can also take this zip file, give it to an administrator, and say, okay, now go deploy this. I just deployed it to the staging environment or a test environment. It looks great. Here's the package. Go and deploy it to the production environment. But there's more to the app than just the static content, the pages, and the code. There's also data. You might have created data in some databases that is part of your application's configuration. Visual Studio allows you to specify different development environments and then target the connection string for your database, so create multiple connection strings for each one of them. Right? If you're running in staging, then go to this database. If you're running in production, go to that database. In addition to that, you can also pull data out of your development database, and that could be the data the schema, or both. So you specify where's the database that you want to pull the data from, what it is that you want to pull from it, and then it generates a script for you that gets run, that gets executed when you deploy it. So it can create the database schemas that you need. It can create the data that you need for its configuration data, and so on. And if that's not enough and you want to further customize it, you can add your own custom scripts. And that's it. But what you give what the developer can now give the administrator is a deployment package. And that's what I meant when I said that it's more explicit, but there's less need for documents and communication, all those things that hard to keep in sync with what the code does and are error prone, and no more late night debugging of why is the system not working, and then you figure out that somebody forgot to do a step in the 50-page manual for here's how we deploy our system. Right? Just put a little note there to the admin, send it off, and you're good. So to summarize deployment automation, with .NET 4, you can create IIS apps on the destination server, configure them, copy the files that need to be there, change things in web config, like the connection string, but there could be other things, application settings, etc. Right? And then provide a data, the schema, or both for the SQL Server database that is used by the app. More details on this are here. And the third reason why you should move to .NET 4 is because it makes web deployment really easy. Developers, productivity. The IDE adds in JavaScript IntelliSense support. So now when you're writing JavaScript inside of your web apps, you get IntelliSense for that, as well as autocomplete snippets for HTML and ASP.NET. But the thing that I want to talk to you about, the thing I'm going to show you in a second, well, I'm going to show you two things that, let me ask you a question. How many people here are familiar with dynamic data? Okay. If you have a website that is data-driven, and you got like the front end for the website, and then you got this back end to the website where you can like put stuff in a database and configure things, and you're writing code to do that, stop. Next thing I'm going to show you might be worth the price of admission to TechEd by itself, because of the amount of time that this thing is going to save you. Go to Visual Studio and start a new project. So I'm going to create a dynamic data entity web application. Oh, nice. And this web application is created for me. Now, remember what I told you about scripts? Here's jQuery, right in there. Okay? I'm going to take, and I have a database here that I'm using, so I'm just going to add an existing item. I'm going to add this expense report database. Okay? Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add access to that database. So I am going to create a new item, and it is going to be an ADO.NET entity data model. Okay? So at that, we're going to generate that from the database, and our database is this one. You see that it is going to go and interrogate the database and find out my tables inside of that. So I'm going to take the approvers, employees, and expenses, hit finish. And here's the schema, the view of the data that was created for me. Okay? So this is an EDMX document, shows me all the relationships and the tables and everything that I have in there. I'm going to go here to my global ASAX, and I'm going, where is that? There we go. You know what? This is really small. Let me bump up the font. How about this? It's a little better. Can you see it in the back? Raise your hands if you can see it in the back. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to go here and say, for the model, register this context, and do me a favor, create me some scaffolding for it. Okay? That's it. That's it. I think we're under 2 minutes. So yeah, add debugging information to it. And here's the skeleton implementation of data access to my database. I can go and look at the employees. I can see the employees. I can edit their details. I can delete employees. I can view the employees. There you go. Instant CRUD. Create, read, update, delete. All right. Dynamic data in .NET Framework 3.5 SP1. It existed there. In 3.5 SP1, we had customization, which gave us optional control of markup of what things are going to look like using templates, as well as validation for the entry fields that I have using attributes on the data classes that were generated for me. It also had some limitations. The first one, not that important, is that data access must have been based on Entity Framework or linked to SQL. The more important one was that the web project must have been created using the dynamic data or dynamic data entities template. You had to create the project using this template. In 4.0, you can do that for existing projects. So if you have a project that you're working on and you're writing that backend code, stop, do that. There are a lot of enhancements around customization with things like entity templates and ufill templates for things like URL and email addresses so that when people type them in, they would be typed in correctly, creating dynamic links from the data, and so on and so forth. As well as enhancements to the data model with things like inheritance and many-to-many relationship and better recognition of what your data looks like in the database. More details are available here. And the fourth reason of why I want to move to .NET 4 is because it can save you tons of time. Tons of time. So, web apps, what can .NET do for them? You can create more usable applications. You can improve performance. You can create applications that are more standard compliant out of the box, deploy a lot more efficiently, and make developers, like yourself, a lot more productive. That was web apps, client apps. .NET 4 and WPF4 inside of that are highly tuned for Windows 7. Let me show you what I mean by that. Told you to do a lot of conferences. There we go. All right. So here's this application, and it's a little timer application, right? It counts down from 1 minute, so I can start the timer like that. I can pause it, I can stop it, it resets to 0, it goes to 0, I can reset it, it goes to 1. Okay, very simple application. Let's see what it does on Windows 7. So you see here, there's a little icon here, and if I click that, I get the preview. Now what I get here in the preview, oh, why is the screen cut off? All right, well, I think we can see that. What you can see is the very bottom of my screen, which is the taskbar. Can we fix that, video people? Video people? Okay. So I'm hovering over the icon. Oh, that's really not good. I'm hovering over the icon, and you can see that what I see in the preview is not the full application. Media Player does that too. Right? You don't see everything around the thing that you really want to focus on. You just see the time. All those controls are not there. However, I do have those buttons down here. And the buttons down here allow me to control my app. They're not the same buttons that you see on the app at the bottom. They're separate apps that are built into Windows into the preview little screen. And I can do the same thing here. I can reset it, I can start it, I can pause it from here. So I don't have to go to my app in order to be able to do some basic operations that I want to do there. Here's what I can do. I'll show it to you here. Cool. So one thing that you are probably used to with Internet Explorer when you download files is that little progress bar, that little green progress bar that it has over the icon. So what you can see there is that little progress bar moving forward as the time goes down. If your application does something that takes a long time, instead of asking the users to always go back to the application and see, are you done yet? Are you done yet? No, let me go back to my email. Are you done yet now? No, let me go back to something else. Instead of that, you could just have a progress bar like that on the icon that's going to tell your users what's going on with your app and how far along are you in your long operation. All those things are very easy to implement with WPF without a lot of coding. They're mostly markup. WPF4 helps you create more compelling apps, apps that users like. You can leverage multi-touch. If you're running on Windows 7 and you have a touchscreen, you can do that with WPF4. And you can create Office-looking apps with a ribbon control. And this is an out-of-band release, so it wasn't ready when they shipped .NET 4, but there's a link to it. And you can download and create applications that look like Office, which users are more used to. Reason number 5 why you want to move to .NET 4 is that it makes your apps shine brighter on Windows 7. WPF4 adds a lot of things with productivity and usability. There's an improved designer in Visual Studio. You can customize a control's look by its state. So if you have a button, right, you might want to give some visual cues or some custom control that you have. So you can create states and say, when the user hovers over my control, it should look like this. When the control is pressed, it should look like this. When it's released, it should look like this. This is all in markup. Microsoft added support for a lot of things that we really wanted and have asked for, like calendar and data grids and date pickers and things of that nature. There's improved animation support with things that were brought back from Silverlight into WPF, and some improvements on text rendering. It used to be a little blurry before. It's a lot better now. Reason number 6 why I want to move to .NET 4 is because it makes your desktop apps rock, especially on Windows 7. XBAP. How many people here know about XBAP? How many people here use XBAP? XBAP, it's like a little stepchild. Not a lot of people know about it. It's been there since .NET 3, and it's an XML-based, it's a XAML-based browser application. Basically, it's WPF running inside of a browser. Okay? So the benefit of that over Silverlight is that Silverlight is a subset of the .NET framework. And if you want to build something that really needs that .NET framework, or you want to migrate a standard app to the web, then that's the right solution for you. The benefit of that over Eggsys is that there's no install. You go to the web page, it's there. .NET 4 added full trust support for XBAP. So now you can really do everything that you can do from a WPF app inside something that runs in a browser. Called WPF, access local file system, the registry, whatever it is that you want to do, you're running in full trust. And also added the ability to interact with the hosting page, something that I'm guessing was borrowed from Silverlight, where you're running inside of an HTML app, you got all this new power of HTML, why not use that? So you can actually interact from the XBAP app with the page that it lives in. More details are available here, and let me show you a quick demo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a random web service. Okay? So this is WCF service running on this machine. Could be running anywhere, really. And I'm going to connect to it from something that's going to be running inside of a web page. So here's my web page. I'm running in full trust. So it's going to ask me, actually, this is improved in IE9. I still have IE8 here for compatibility reasons. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a file. So I have the cat, let me pick up the dog. And I've reached into the HTML from this control. I've reached into the HTML part that was over here. You can see this is like HTML, right? I changed the information here. And I also made a call into the WCF website, web service, and provided it with some information. See the code for that. What you will see is that this is a WPF app. Just if you know how to write WPF, you know how to write XBAP. There's no other skills involved. This is the XAML. Okay, it's just plain old XAML, right? Little grid. Thank you. Little grid control, a stack panel, and here's the code. And in the code, we can see that we access the local file system, we send it to an arbitrary WCF service, and we interact with the HTML page. Now, remember this code. You don't have to memorize it. I'm going to show it to you again, okay, when we talk about something else. So reason number 7, why to move to .NET 4? Is because it unleashes the potential of XBAP with this full trust support. The last thing in this course is going to be the current investments. Current investments is going to be investments in the frameworks. And I'm going to talk about 3 frameworks, WCF, WF, and Entity Framework. WCF, near and dear to my heart, was enhanced significantly and very nicely in .NET 4 with things like the routing service that we wanted to have from the beginning. So now you can route messages based on content, as well as support for WS Discovery. It lets you create applications or systems, that can find the components and dynamically discover the services that they're going to use, as well as a slew of investments around the web protocol, and especially REST, with things like integration with the routing and caching and format supports and a lot of other things. It also has better integration with IIS, with things like support for HTTP decompression, and a much simplified configuration story, which was one of the biggest pains with WCF. That's not a pain, an obstacle, I should say. In fact, you can even do configless, no config, WCF services, which reduces or eliminates the likelihood of configuration errors. In addition, there are things like default endpoints. So if you just specify where you want your app to listen and say, create me the default endpoints, the system will automatically find out, based on your URL, what kind of endpoint it needs to create to support that. And standard endpoints for things like MEX and discovery and things like that are, WCF knows what the configuration should look like, so it can just create that for you. And lastly is configuration-based activation, so that if you want to host a WCF service inside of IIS, you no longer need a .svc file. So using WCF became a lot less complicated, a lot easier through all those improvements that were made specifically around how you configure it. More details are available here, and we're going to talk about Windows Virtual Foundation. So WF is an embedded workflow engine, a workflow engine you can take and run inside of your application. In .NET 4, WF was rewritten from scratch and is significantly better, in my opinion, than what we had with 3.5. With things like the redesigned activity and data model, how you flow information back and forth, things of that nature, absolutely fantastic. New flow control activities with things like flowcharts. The built-in activity library was expanded, and they have a WPF-based designer that you can go and embed in your own applications if you want to let people design graphically what the workflow should look like. So that is embeddable, so you can use that. And I mentioned that it's a rewrite, and so 3.5 is included for full backward compatibility. So if you are using WF today, if you are using WF 3.5 today, have no fear. When you move to 4, it's just going to keep running as is, no porting required. More details are available here, and Entity Framework. How many people here use Entity Framework? How many people here use Entity Framework 4? Great. How many people here use Entity Framework 4.1? I'm going to talk about all those things. So, Entity Framework 4. Entity Framework 4 allows you to easily migrate from, or leverage, if you want to leverage it, T-SQL. So if you have T-SQL statements today and you want to use Entity Framework, it will take your query and project the results into CLR objects that are then a lot easier to deal with in your code. It also lets you leverage existing investments that you've made in the data model. So for example, if you have a lot of business logic in Sprox and stored procedures in the SQL Server, you can leverage that. You don't have to change that by choosing to use Entity Framework. And it has better performance and testability. I'm going to touch on this for like a microsecond. .NET 4 enables data first, model first, and code first development. So, and you see those little stars there, and we're going to talk about where they come in a second. Entity Framework 4 introduced the model-first support, where you draw the diagram first, and then you can generate the schema, database schema, and the objects from that. It has a lot of improvements. I'm not going to go over all of them. Testability is the one that I mentioned. So there's the object set of T that you can then go and write tests against. There's lazy loading. So if you got a large hierarchy, then you don't need to load it all in. You just load it as you access the information. The designer is extensible. There's a lot more than even I can fit on this slide. 4.1 was released a month ago, which is why I applaud the people who raised their hand. 4.1 introduces code-first support, which lets you define your data model using C# or VB. And then you can either map them to an existing database or generate the schema from that. As somebody who feels more comfortable in code than in SQL, I really like that. It also adds the DB Context API, which is a simpler abstraction layer on top of the object context that existed there from before, that is more optimized for the things that we'd like to do, and it can be used with either of the models, with the data first, the model first, or the code first. More details and download links for Entity Framework 1 are available here, and let me show you a quick demo. Now, I talked before about two things that I'm going to show you about improving productivity, the back end, and now we're going to talk about how you can improve that on the front end. Okay? So on the front end, I'll probably want to use MVC3, and I'm going to use Entity Framework 4.1, and together, they're fairly awesome. So, I'm going to run Visual Studio and create a new project. Now, I'm going to pick the MVC3, where is that? There we go. MVC3. So we're going to create a new MVC3 project. And as you see, MVC3 introduces another thing. So we had the empty and internet, and now we have intranet. So internet has the role and providers and all those things. Intranet uses integrated authentication, integrated Windows authentication. So if you're running an intranet app, that's probably the one that you want to use. So we're going to go ahead and create that. And okay, you can see the scripts, all the jQuery stuff that was created. And you can see here under the references that it adds a reference to the Entity Framework 4.1. Okay? So I'm going to do code first. I'm going to go and create a new class to represent my model. Okay, I'm going to call it, let's see, we're in the conference, so session. Okay, so I have a session class, and in my class, I would probably want to have not an entry point not found, but a property that would be the ID, a property that would be the name, a property for where it would take place, so let's just say room. And so every class belongs to a track, so let's add the track ID. Okay. So now I want to add a track. Yeah. That's fine. Let's add a track class. So public class track. And the track is going to have a track ID. And a name. Okay. Now, what would be really nice is to be able to go and from the session to the track and from the track to the session. So let's start with this one. So I'm going to add a public virtual track. I'm going to call it track. Okay. And here, I'd like to add a list of the sessions that are in the track. So let's just make it an I collection of track. Yeah. And we'll call it, of session. We'll call it sessions. Okay. So now I have my high-level data model. What I want to do is I want to create some data context for that. So I'll add a class that's going to be my conference context, and it is going to derive from DB context, which comes from the entity model. And in this class, I will have two properties. One is going to be a database set of session, which is going to be called sessions. And the other one is going to be a DB set of track that is going to be called tracks. All right, compile, make sure that it all works. Great, no mistake here. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new controller. Okay, so I'm going to add a controller, and you see that this is a little bit different than what you saw before. I'm going to add a controller, if you're familiar with MVC. I'm going to add a track controller, and the template for this is going to be a controller with read-write action views and using the entity framework. So the class model is going to be a track, and we're going to pull it from the conference context. Okay. Yeah, no, Mr. D, thank you. This was really interesting. You see that everything is done by convention. So they needed to be connected through the same name. So the fact that I missed it, there we go. The fact that I missed it basically made my code not compile. But the fact that I have it, if I just name things correctly, things just work. And you can see that the controller and all the views were created for it. And so that now, I could go in, and I wanted to show you this before we start. Okay, so this is the SQL Server Management Studio. I'm looking at my SQL Express installation. I can see the Windows Azure DB storage and some system databases, but that's all I have. Okay, so let me go to the track. I don't have a link from the... Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new track. So we're in the dev track, and I'm going to create an architecture track. And we can see that all this data is here and available, and I can edit it, and I can view it, and I can delete it. Where is it stored? Where is this stored? I never configured a database. Well, let's go back here and refresh. And what happened is that I didn't configure one, and so Entity Framework, by default, went and said, ooh, do you have a SQL Express installed? Yeah, okay, I'm going to use that. And it created the database for me. So I did a code-first approach. I just wrote my code, and it created me the tables for the sessions and the tracks with the right columns and the right foreign keys and everything. So let's go and add another controller. We'll add another controller for the sessions. Okay, and the model class is going to be session. So I'm going to model it after this. I'm going to add that. Again, it adds the views for the sessions. It has the controller, everything that I need. All I need to do now is style and add some links on the home page. And here's my front end. So if I go to the track, the session, here's my empty list of sessions. I go ahead and create a new one. And it's going to be in this room. And it's going to be in the dev track. Hold on. Where did the strings come from? I give it an ID. How does it know to bring the names? Convention. I called it name, and so Entity Framework said, oh, name, it's probably one I want to display in the UI, not the ID. Right? And if I had a title, it'll pick that up. There's a list of things that it goes and looks through, and it's all by convention. So I can create that, and here we go. Loading on time, not too good. All right, so .NET 4 enhances your current investments in the .NET platform, in client and web apps, and in the frameworks. Reason number 8 why move to .NET 4? Because it gives you a lot more of the things that you love. Second course, and we're running out of time. I'm going to be fairly quick about that then. .NET 4 has major improvements in COM interop with things like type embedding that remove the need for a primary interop assembly, as well as type equivalence that says that if things look the same, they must be the same, and so you can target multiple versions of Office from the same add-in. It also adds optional and name parameters for C#, and that thing basically cleans up all your call code. So you can specify these are optional parameters because they have default values. So when I call them here, I don't have to specify them. They're also named so that I can say this name is true and the beep is true and prefix is sys. And even though the order was different here, I can specify them in any order that I want and omit the ones that I don't want. And it has faster interop marshalling. So as you go to call COM interop, the more complicated the signature is of the method that you're calling, the faster your code is going to run. Or the more impact it's going to have, I should say. Reason number 9 why I moved to .NET is because it makes it easy to leverage the Office platform. SharePoint development. How many people here develop for SharePoint? Not a lot of people. SharePoint is a hit, right? SharePoint sells like, better than whatever. The thing is that it used to be really difficult to develop the SharePoint. Really difficult. But with SharePoint 2010 and Visual Studio 2010, they worked together to solve that problem. And now, as a developer, you get your own local copy of SharePoint. You don't need a server OS for that. It'll run on Windows 7. And you don't need a dev server like you used to have to where you go and deploy. And it's all integrated into the F5 experience. So when you press F5, it automatically deploys SharePoint, the SharePoint extension that you built onto the server. your local server, instead of doing the 12 manual steps, that's what it used to take before, you press F5, boom, it's there, it gets deployed, it's running, breakpoints are working, source level debugging is working, everything just works. SharePoint development just became a world easier. Reason number 10 why you want to move to .NET 4 is because it makes it so much easier to develop SharePoint apps. WCF Data Services. I'll be quick on that because I want to show you the demo. It's really cool. WCF Data Services used to be called Astoria, and then ADO.NET Data Services gives you safe CRUD over data sources. It implements OData. More details on that here. It has a self-describing data model. I'll show you what that means. And you can access it from a broad range of browsers, client applications, server applications, and so on. So let me pull up a solution that I have made previously. Actually, it's going to be quicker to do it from here. And so this is a basic web app. I already just registered the database and created the entity framework model for it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add support for WCF Data Services. So I'm going to add a new item, the web, the bottom, WCF Data Services, and I'm going to call it entity. What's a good name for that? Let me see. Yeah, I'm going to call it expenses because we're going to model the expenses database, and I have the code kind of figured out for that. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the expense. That's better. Expense report entities. So it's going to be a data service for the expense report entities that I had from before. And I am going to say the following. Set the entity access rules for the employees to all read. What else did I have in there? Approvers and expenses. Okay, so I'm going to set the access rights to all read, and then I'm going to run that. While this is coming up, let me fire up Excel. So what you see here is that I have an OData feed for my information. So it's self-explanatory, right? It's self-describing. You know what is in there, and then you can go and you can drill into that. And that's really cool, and you can do this. There are frameworks that can go and work against that, and you have access to your data. But what's really cool, and if you were at the keynote this morning, you saw Power Pivot. So now Power Pivot knows how to go and access that. So if I have some data that's in a backend database and I want to expose it for my users, and it's all safe and it's read-only and you can protect it and you can make sure that only people with the right kind of access will have access to it, then you can take it. If they want to do their own reporting, tell them, here's your feed. Nice. Okay. Here's your feed. Take what you want. So I'm going to go read that. And here's my data. And I can do pivot tables on it, and I can do charts on it, and I can analyze it in any way that I want, right, as a user of the system without having a developer create all those things for me. WCF Data Services adds support for OData 2 with a lot of cool things that OData 2 enables. And it has some new features like server-driven paging so that the server can say what is the page size that is going to serve to the client when you do paging, data binding, streaming of binary sources, and other things. More details about WCF Data Services are here. And reason number 11, why move to .NET 4, is because it lets you set your data free and let users have at it when they want to create their own reports, when they want to analyze it, etc. The DLR, Dynamic Language Runtime. That's a new runtime that was added in .NET 4 that lets you add support for dynamic languages. What does it provide? Well, for the languages, it makes it easier to develop dynamic languages and add dynamic features to the static languages. For application developers, it makes it easy to integrate with dynamic languages like R in Python, R in Ruby, and go and interact with expandos, dynamic objects that are built in C# or VB, as well as anything that implements the iDispatch COM interface. If it implements iDispatch, you can work with it. What does that mean? It means that you can access things like the HTML DOM and Office and .NET Reflection and all those things with those hard APIs very, very dynamic, in a very natural, simple way. So remember that piece of code that I showed you before that I said we're going to come back to it? This is the code from the XBAP app. Here's what I'm doing here. I'm reaching into the browser's DOM. Told you we can do that. And I'm getting back a dynamic object. Now here's what I'm going to do with this dynamic object. I'm going to navigate the DOM, and then I'm going to call a JavaScript function. I'm calling a JavaScript function from a C# code. And I'm passing it a CLR string. So if you wanted to think about extensibility, wow, can I extend my app with some scripting libraries or things like that? Yes, you can. And this is how you can do it. So you can add support for customization and extensions and do complex things that are better done using text. So instead of writing your own domain-specific language, here's an app that I helped Microsoft write, and it's this Twitter analyzer thing. And so you put a keyword or a hashtag, and it'll go and analyze that. This is a great app for demonstrating all the new capabilities in .NET 4. And here's where we do a query. And this query is written in Python. So instead of writing complex UI with ands and ors and things you drop and drag and whatever else, I just put a text box. And I can just evaluate this Python from within this C# application. There's a VB version as well. If you want to see this app, if you want to see the code, here's where it's available. It'll be there when you download the slide, and you can take a look at it. So reason number 12, why I want to move to .NET 4 is because it helps you bridge that dynamic to static gap. Those dynamic languages, which are awesome for what they do, and the static languages, which are awesome for what they do, now can come together and help you provide the solution that you want using the right tools. MEF. MEF is awesome. MEF is one of the things that I'm most happy about with .NET Framework 4, not because a friend of mine wrote it, but because it's really cool. And I'm going to show you a tiny, tiny demo of it, but it's basically USB for code. Okay, that's what it is. It's like plug and play at the simplest level. It helps you build extensible and composable apps that adhere to this thing called the open-closed principle. The applications are open for extensions, but they're closed for modifications. You can't change the app, but you can extend it. And the way this works is by this plug-and-play integration where you specify the points in your app that you want to be extensible, and then you provide all those things that can extend, and then MEF brings it all together and just connects things like magic. Some attributes, and boom, it works. I'm going to show you how it works, not the code for it. If you want the code, come see me later. Okay. So I have this thing here called ExtensiCalc. This is the last calculator you'll ever need. So I told you I'm into entrepreneurship. I'm going to create the best calculator in the world. Okay? And so, yeah, you can do 1 point, and you can do all sorts of operations. And it turns out I forgot a few things. Just like, or we like computer things. Doesn't work. Luckily, I used MEF. And so, instead of rewriting the app and redeploying it to all my customers and stuff like that, hundreds of them, everybody loves this thing. I just shipped them this DLL, and I said, well, just create this directory, call it extensions. I decided that it needs to be called extensions, but in my code, I could have decided that it needs to be called foo. And then just take this little DLL, drop it in here. Okay? And now, look at my app. Hooray! It works. Okay? Without changing the code, without writing config, without getting into XML, without doing all this stuff, right? I went ahead and with very, very simple code, implemented extensibility. Reason number 13 why I want to move to .NET 4 is because it takes the hassle out of application extensibility. If you're writing anything that needs to be extended in any way, use MEF. Multi-core. I love parallel distributed computing. I've been working on this in this field for more than 20 years now. We get this awesome this is my laptop. This is a screenshot from my laptop from Task Manager, right? It's i7, quad-core, hyper-threaded. It's awesome, looks like 8 CPUs. And what is it doing most of the time? Nothing. Nothing really. Right? It turns out it's really hard to make it sweat. Not because it's so powerful, but because it's hard to write apps that make it sweat. So the way we used to do this thing before, the way we used to make apps do more for us is by using threads, right? We use threads. The problem with threads, there are two major ones, or two categories even, right? One is that threads are heavyweight, and the other one is that they're hard to compose. Threads are heavyweight because they take about 90,000 clock cycles to spin. Each one of them is allocated a megabyte of virtual memory for its stack, so imagine spinning up 1,000 out of memory, right? It's hard to context switch. Optimizing the use is not trivial. You got a bunch of work and 10 threads, so you kind of distribute the work, and you hope that you distribute it evenly so that you don't get one thread that gets all the hard work and one thread, all the other threads get all the easy work. And it's really not good for quick parallelism. They're also really hard to compose. Oops, nice. They're also really hard to compose, so passing data back and forth is not simple, and so on and so forth. What is the solution? Well, .NET 4 introduces two. One is declarative, plink, parallel link. It's magic. You write your link query, you just write as parallel, boom, it runs faster. Wow. The other one is the task parallel library, or the TPL, and the parallel safe data structures that come with it. There's a lot of information on this on the web, a lot of talks. I gave a talk last TechEd about this. So if it's still online, you can go and catch that. And here's the link for more information on that. I am actually not going to go into a lot of details about what this does and how this works, just because of time. But I highly recommend that if you're doing anything that requires some sort of usage of the CPU, or if you're doing things that wait, use TPL. Things that wait, like network access, disk access, things of that nature. TPL makes parallelism simpler, more efficient, and if you want control, you have all the control that you want. Reason number 14 why I moved to .NET 4 is because it helps you leverage multi-core and hyper-threading. So talking about tools and the new things you get, the new tools you get, we talked about Office and SharePoint, showed you WCF data services and OData and how you access that, dynamic language runtime, MEF, and the TPL. The future. Here's our dessert. Just a few more minutes. Next generation platforms. What are they? Everybody been to the keynote? Cloud and phone. Right? Cloud and phone, fully supported. In fact, the cloud tools from the extensions for Visual Studio are probably one of the best I've seen in how to go and leverage cloud computing. You can play with it all on your machine. You don't need to have accounts with anybody. You don't need to pay anybody money. You can just go do that. And so reason number 15 why I moved to .NET 4 is because it takes your apps to new places. The future of parallel computing. There's actually a talk about that. So I'm just going to give you a glimpse of what that is. But there's the async programming model that was announced at the PDC. You can download the async CTP here. And all of the .NET framework is aligning with this. This is where the future is going. There's this thing called the async programming model, which lets you take all sorts of things that can wait or do things that are blocking. And instead of blocking, just do everything asynchronously. And create this scenario. Here's a kind of an asynchronous scenario, but a lot of things that wait. And you can take this, this logic that I specify kind of sequentially and run it all asynchronously by using the new keywords and the new things like await, where you can see, you can read the code. It reads like serial code, right? but everything is done without the CPU ever blocking. There's no UI thread is not. If this runs on UI thread, the UI thread will not block. You don't have an hourglass or the spinning circle of death or whatever that is today. It just works. Reason number 16 why I moved to .NET 4 is because it prepares you, and especially with the TPL, it prepares you for the future. Going back to the beginning of the talk, the progression that I showed you, this is where the languages and .NET is going. Why I moved to .NET 4? I gave you at least 16 reasons to go to .NET 4. It provides you a ton of value by enhancing your current investment, gives you new powerful tools, prepares you for the future. Go ahead, adopt it today, go forth and innovate. Some related content, there are so many talks in this conference. There are 15 talks about MVC. There's a lot of talks. These are just highlight of a few of them. Some resources, please fill out your evals, write your comments. I read every single one of them. Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience. Enjoy.